Why is Duke first?
Duke's
Oh,
2020.
you're doing it. Okay, all right. You're going in reverse. I got it. All right.
All right. Well, a little bit of a jumbled start there, but we are doing our preseason coaches poll reveal today. I am Brian. I am the Wisconsin, the commissioner for CFFB. I'm joined by ever faithful Lewis, who is a Baylor. Lou, how are you today?
I'm good. I'm ready for football. It's like one of the few times, like the last couple of years, where I've actually been ready for like fantasy football.
Same. I think this time of year I'm getting a little more into it. Asked me a few weeks ago, I probably was not paying that much attention. Um, but today we're just going to kind of go through. We've had a very abbreviated coaches poll period. I apologize. I was on vacation for the last like 10 days, so I really didn't have access to spit stuff out at people. But we got about 14 submissions for votes. That's right. And we're just going to review how people voted. This really doesn't have much of a bearing on anything. It's just a fun exercise, as well as allowing us to kind of do some distillation on who we think the top teams are, as well as getting kind of a consensus. So we're just going to go through the top 25. We'll kind of review the teams and what we think of them personally, Lou and I, and we'll kind of run through a simulation at the end that is based on the Martin metric. We oftentimes refer to this in the league through multiple projections periods throughout the year, but it's just a projection model that is ran through some projections that MFL creates, and we just kind of aggregate them and run it through what a projected season is using those projections. So we'll kind of do that at the end. But not to make this long intro any longer, but with that all said, our top 25th team in the coaches poll this season is Duke out of the ACC. Duke got 7 top 25 votes, putting it right at the edge there. It is a team that I think is properly placed. It looks like it's got a few pretty good players, but there is some depth kind of lingering questions where it's not too top end. It's got good enough depth, but I think it's a team that probably will probably fit right around there unless some surprises happen on its roster. Scheduling wise, it's got a pretty mixed bag in terms of non-conference. Plays teams like that are projected to be pretty easy, like Purdue, and then it's got tough opponents like Central Michigan and Arkansas State. It does seem to have the benefit of playing in the ACC Coastal, which we'll see some general trends on that group over the year, but it should hopefully allow them to pick up some easy wins against teams like Georgia Tech, Pitt, Virginia Tech, Virginia. With only some real teams to worry about is North Carolina and potentially Miami. So that's the team in a nutshell. They're projected to go 9-3 and 7-2 in conference, which puts them projected to be the second or tied for second. I don't remember what exactly in the ACC Coastal. I don't know, Lou, if this feels right for you or not, but
Yeah, so I had Duke at a little bit higher than 25 when I put my rankings together. I had them at 16. And I think really what you're looking for out of a top 25 is like a solid 8. Then maybe you have a couple little depth pieces, and then you kind of like nitpick things, right? Like, what do their bye weeks look like? What does the schedule look like? What does quarterback depth look like? Because that's where I mean, small little things like that make the difference. Like if you only have one QB more often than not, if you're playing, a solid competitor, your quarterback's on a bye. Like most of the time, that gets chalked up as a loss. So here we've got 2 quarterbacks with differing bye weeks, so that helps. And then there's a solid for me. I have it a little bit higher, like I said, than the 25, but I like the 8 that are there. But then maybe as this team kind of develops throughout the season, you pick up like a Jonathan Brooks. I would assume he's playing Malik Neighbors. that kind of gives him almost 10 guys to rotate, which at that point, again, if everything stays healthy, I think that's a pretty solid kind of 10. And they also finished, I mean, it was a pretty good team last year. They finished 10-3 last year. So um, I think, again, in the ACC, they probably can put up, similar, similar stats in that win-loss column.
Mm-hmm. I think it's generally kind of appropriate with where it sits. I think they play in a weaker division. They play. They have a kind of competitive team. I think you're saying they're in the top quarter of the lineups that you'll see, but when you start getting up higher and higher, you need to kind of even have better than what they have to make it higher than that. So I think they're properly placed too. They could maybe get a little bit higher depending on how teams win or lose throughout the season, and if they do play kind of a soft division schedule, I think they could catch up on some people to maybe make it up to that 16 mark like you were alluding to. So that's Duke. Number 24 is... Let's see here.
Northwestern.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Northwestern. Out of the Big Ten, this is Benson's team. Benson has had a lot of good teams over the years, and this one isn't really much of an exception. It's supposed to score a lot of points, has some really good top-end pieces like Amon-Ra St. Brown, Kenneth Walker, Sam Laporta is also a really good asset to have. And it somehow acquired 2 quarterbacks, which it desperately needed this rookie auction, which I expect one of them is playing this year. I don't know if it's going to be Nix or Caleb Williams. I would assume Caleb, but I don't know if this team is going to have the ability to hold its own. It does seem to play a pretty tough schedule, playing teams like Kent State, Michigan. I think it happens to have a unfortunate bye week where it's projected to lose. It plays Wisconsin. It also plays Iowa, another stronger team, as well as Illinois, and Nebraska is not supposed to be any bit of a slouch. So I think he is going to be still competitive, going to have a bigger challenge than he did the last couple seasons. I do think he will be really good still. And if some of these games break his way, he could really fly up the ranking boards. But yeah, that's Northwestern. They ended up with 6 top 25 votes and got in at the 24th spot. So also had just a few higher spots than Duke in people's polls. But I don't know about your thoughts there, Lou.
I didn't have them in my top 25. They were on my list. I'm trying to find who else. I want to say like I had them, Michigan. I'm like old school, so I write all this shit down. So I'm looking for like the scratch piece of paper that I was like scratching out teams on, but I don't have it in front of me. But they were on my list of like, do I put them in the top 25? And they would have been slotted into this spot. Like as I was coming down to the last couple spots, I think I might have had Cincinnati on the list. I think I had Northwestern, Michigan, just like teams that were all kind of in that category. And ultimately I left Northwestern off for teams that I thought maybe had a little bit of more potential upside if things broke right for them. I like it. I like the running backs, the three running backs there. I just am not crazy again. Like everybody seems to be crazy about the rookie quarterback groups, and there's a big difference. I think I mentioned this when somebody didn't like where I had a different team ranked, but Caleb Williams and Bo Nix, like, yeah, you have quarterbacks, but you don't know where those guys are going to fall, right? Like, you want them to be good. We think they're going to be good, but like I said in the example, there's a difference between getting a CJ Stroud and a Bryce Young. And so, like, if you end up with a Bryce Young on the quarterback, again, nothing against Bryce Young, but, like, you're going to lose, like, if you have, like, a better team. Like, I don't know how to say, like, I don't know how to be like without being mean. Like, you're gonna lose when you go up against teams that are starting like Trevor Lawrence and um I'm trying to think who else puts up CJ Stroud and just the better quarterbacks and the better teams. So like where I see teams making up a lot of ground is where they have like that stud quarterback that can put up like 30 points in a week. And I'm not sure, again, without seeing it, that you get it from the rookies. I mean, he has two chances at it, but I just struggle here in terms of like, again, that solid 8 depth because you're just back in the category of playing tight ends, and I hate tight ends.
Yeah, I think that's where I would kind of fit too. I would be worried a little bit about their ceiling. I think I voted Northwestern to be 18th in my submission, but I do worry about their ceiling. Like Caleb Williams could be really good, but I have no idea if Caleb Williams is going to be this good. I also don't know if I'm putting a lot of faith again in another season of Trey McBride or Sam Laporta scoring as well as he did. I mean, last year it was Amon-Ra St. Brown and Sam Laporta essentially for the Lions, and now we're supposed to expect Jamison Williams as like this vaunted second option that's coming along. I just only think there's so many targets to be seen out of an offense like that. So we'll see. I think we're probably seeing a slight retooling. Like this is going to maybe be one of his last seasons for the next couple years competing really hard like this. I think we'll see a slight slump next year when players like Amon-Ra are graduated and he has potential decisions about like Kenneth Walker, who I think's got an award tagged to him. Javonte Williams, I think, is a senior too. And he'll have the quarterbacks in place to like quickly rebuild, but I'm wondering if this might be one of a slight rebuild is in order for Northwestern, but he did really well with setting himself up. At number 23, though, we're going to stay in the Big Ten, actually the Big Ten West, and go with Iowa. Iowa is a very interesting team. It is projected to do well. It's projected to also have some pretty good depth. But when we do the projections, it seems like it also has one of the hardest schedules set for it. And I think it's actually got the third highest projected opponent all play. So I think it's going to be a gauntlet. If he can win a few games and switch it up, I think he could really fly up rankings and maybe have a shot at it at the playoff, which is 16 teams this year, if people don't remember. He got a few bit of love, but he got really high votes. He got 2 top 5 votes in the coaches poll, so someone believes in this team. I would also be a little worried about like Jamar Chase. It seems like this team's going to be heavily relying upon those 2 wide receivers to put up points, and as Lou alluded to, the unknown with a rookie QB. So this kind of seems like a really toss-up. Could be a really great team. Teams that want to score a lot of points, has a really tough schedule, could really hold it back. But not sure what your thoughts are on Iowa at all, Lou.
Yeah, I mean, same thing again. We're again. I didn't have them in my top 25, and I don't think that they were even on the list of the 4 or 5 teams that I had left off my top 25. So I probably have them outside the top 30. Would be my guess. But yeah, again, same thing. Even if you don't go with the rookie QB, it's Will Levis, where that compares against the quarterbacks in this league. He's going to be to the bottom portion of that, at least based off of what we saw last year. We're back into all the tight ends with Michael Mayers, Trey McBrides, Kyle Pitts. I think Laporta's on this team too. So you're just back, and again, it's very similar. You're relying on like what we just said: Laporta, St. Brown. Again, the Lions offense, and so really for me, like the difference here, why I left this team off is the emphasis on like the running backs. I mean, we're gonna see better groups of running backs. We've slightly tinkered with the rules there, and may or may not make running back more valuable. But again, like you're talking about guys like Tajay Spears, Brian Robinson. Like that's the best of what he's got to offer, and I don't think that that's going to be enough when you're going up against some of these teams that have, um, you know,
Bullies.
2, 3, 4 guys that are scoring 200 plus points from that position. I just, in a season, I don't think he's going to be able to measure up against those.
Yeah, it'd be tough, especially with the heavy teams he plays: West Virginia, North Carolina State, Boise, Michigan, Ohio State. Those first 5 games are all really, really pretty good teams, and then he's still got to play the rest of the division. So I don't envy Iowa. He's likely looking up, trying to figure out how to make this go. One more Big Ten team to get through here at 22 is Andy of Illinois. Andy got 7 votes in the top 25 this year. Andy is also the defending Big Ten champion. The projections don't seem to love his chances. I think he lost C.D. Lamb from last year, as well as maybe someone else of note that I can't remember right now. But he had a few graduates, so it's obvious that he could probably see a dip in how well his team hits that ceiling. Still projected to be really good. Plays a pretty good schedule. It's supposed to be rated in the top 30 with some pretty tough opponents. But not nearly as severe as Iowa. He has players like Purdy, Nakua, Nico Collins, Jameer Gibbs, Garrett Wilson. I do a little worry that right now his projected 8th slot is Demario Douglas, so there might be a little bit of a fall off on that 8th spot and the rest of that depth on his team to really kind of carry him through a tough season. But still, it's projected to be a top 25 team. 3rd in the Big Ten West, so he can definitely try for a division title, or to defend his division title and conference title. So that's Andy. Andy always puts a good squad together. Not sure what else feels necessary to say, but if you got anything for it, Lou would definitely hear praise for Andy.
Yeah, 12-1 last year. I had him at 21, so kind of right around this spot where we've got him. He was one of, I think, 4 teams that were in my top 25 that made the shortened version of the playoffs last year. I like it, and again, it's probably a team that it's still a really young team, with the exception of Purdy. I think who's a junior. I think most of his other contributors are freshman, sophomore range. I could be wrong, but I think kind of
Rashad
how
White
he.
and Nico are also like juniors, but otherwise everything else should be pretty good.
His copies say redshirted sophomores, but they could be wrong. I don't know.
No,
Who knows?
that's right.
But so it looks like he's done a really good job managing. Because the one thing when you said Drake May, I was like, really, like you've got Purdy. I'd like to see you, because without looking, he probably spent $50 or $60 on Drake May, and would have liked to see maybe throw that at another position player and solidify yourself. But it's just a really young team. I think he's set up for this year and next year, honestly, based on the moves. And as you go along, if you get something out of Jalen Wright or Trey Benson, I think it makes this team better. But I really like his, and he's got Xavier Worthy. So I really kind of like the pieces he's got. And then he's gotten some younger guys to kind of fold in there. It'll be interesting to see how he maneuvers the red shirts, because it looks like he's more cautious than he is, trying to burn red shirts to get wins now.
Yeah, I think he's pretty realistic with the shot of his team. So if he's not going to be able to win a division or conference or whatever, I think he'll just kind of roll the dice and go with it. But you never know. I think last year he pushed in like Nakua and stuff like that because he was winning and doing much better than he thought he did. So he can pivot. Moving on to number 21, we're moving out west to Oregon State.
This is interesting.
This is a very interesting team. Projected to score really well. Also projected to win a lot of games. Has a
No
decent
quarterback
schedule, but also no quarterback. I think it's because he's got an incredibly top heavy rest of the roster and is getting a big boost from the projections thinking like Justin Fields is going to do something. But yeah, that's a very interesting predicament for this group. I'm not sure what to make of them, but has really great top end talent: Bijan, Nakua, Collins, Chase, Pacheco. Slight drop off with Spears and Coleman projected to be his other starters, but the QB situation is pretty weird. With Justin Fields projected to be his starter and really his only starting option at the moment, but I don't know. I don't know what to make of him. If he's got somewhat of a easy schedule to start the season, plays a few tough teams in the slightly tougher teams in the middle of the season, but seems to be still projected to win a bunch of games. I'm not sure what to make of them.
Yeah, I left them. I mean, I left them off of my top 25. As soon as I saw that they didn't have a quarterback, I removed them. Not to mention Jason likes to argue with me in the Slack channel, so I bumped it as soon as I saw he didn't have a quarterback. But you get the same thing. You have an issue like Jamar Chase if he doesn't play week 1. Not only now do you not have a quarterback, you don't have Jamar Chase, and so the top heaviness you're now looking at nothing from your quarter. I mean, I guess you would have to start Justin Fields and hope that the Steelers use packages for him. I mean, that's your only saving. That's really probably the only saving grace is that the Steelers will, that they find a way to put him in there and you get points for that.
Yeah.
But outside of that, most weeks you're not going to get a whole lot from that position, and then I don't know without Jamar Chase, if he misses a week or misses 2 weeks, depending on when he signs or if he signs, his stuff, it's just going to be kind of a weird thing to monitor. But I left them off my top 25 again, just because the fall off from the top end talent is then meaning you're starting guys like, okay, is Jameson Williams going to have a good year, or rely on Wan'Dale Robinson? And nothing against those guys, but that's a steep fall off when you're talking about a difference between like Jamar Chase, Puka Nakua, Nico Collins. It's just a massive fall from those guys to even a Christian Watson. It'll be interesting. They'll win games, don't get me wrong, but I think that they're also gonna lose games, and I think that they also benefit. I can't remember when I was looking through, but I want to say the Pac-12 is just general is weaker than some of these other conferences.
I think it's more equally distributed. I think the Pac-12 is not nearly as
top heavy. Maybe that's what it is.
Yeah,
there's not many threats to.
Correct. I think they're not as nearly spread out as like the ACC, the Big Ten, SEC even. I think they've kind of all like held their assets. They haven't really had such big transfer markets or a consolidation of players, especially the North compared to the South. Once we get to the South or talk about some of the Pac-12 South teams, I think we'll see more of that disparity between the top and the end. Somehow this team is projected to tie for first place in the Pac-12 North. To your point, I have a hard time believing that that'll happen unless something really breaks his way regarding Justin Fields. Like, even if by week 5 he gets Justin Fields starting for him for the rest of the season, then I could probably start believing some of these things. I have a harder time believing that some of these projected points will stick without a really substantial, consistent output from a quarterback. It seems hard to believe, but that's what it is. All right, moving on to number 20. We are up to here with Cincinnati, our first Big 12 team. Tony out of Cincinnati, I think, did pretty well last year. Maybe not as high as he's projected to do this season. Got eight top 25 votes, as high as so far that we've seen. Projected as scored pretty well. Has a pretty weak schedule, if you ask me, comparatively to other people, which I think helps his projected win total. has some pretty good pieces with ETN, Walker, Stroud to kind of set a cornerstone foundation for his team. Do a little worry about the depth after you get to like Chase Brown and Jonathan Brooks, what comes after that. But plays, I think, the benefit of a weaker schedule with some pretty good assets to kind of get to where he's at, but still is projected to score quite a few points. I don't know if you have any thoughts about how well he might fare with the Big 12 North or anything like that.
Yeah, this is one I mentioned, Cincinnati earlier. They were on that very short list of teams that I left off of the top 25. Again, just in taking a deeper look at it, I think if you were, I know it makes it easier, but like if we didn't have the projected rankings so that people could actually look at the teams, and just kind of give them a fair shake, I think more often than not people would leave Cincinnati off of their list. But with the projections giving them so many wins, I think it's just like, okay, if you just look at these and then just kind of resort them, you get something. I think that's really kind of what benefited Cincinnati. They were 9-4 last year, so again, not a bad team, but he was, I think, in a better spot. I can't remember who graduated from here, but I want to say he was in a better spot last season. But I don't, again, this is one of those teams where I just don't see the firepower. Like, there's some solid players on here, but there's not enough of them. Even if you compare this team to what we just saw in Oregon State, like Oregon State had bigger, better firepower outside of not having a quarterback. Here you're looking at, I don't know, you're starting to talk about like Zay Flowers and Tutu Atwell playing meaningful snaps and Alec Pierce maybe. And I think that there's too much lineup tinkering. Like he's going to have to set the right lineup every week as opposed to just rolling out his studs, which the better teams in the league, will do. So it's just not I don't see it, although the projections like him, I'm not really seeing it. It also looks like, the schedule. Yeah, it really likes. Like he's got Wyoming and Maryland who aren't projected to score a lot of points. Texas is garbage. Iowa State is practically a free win. At least they were last year. I can't imagine they've gotten much better. They've got Kansas on here, who was, I want to say, has won the he's won the Big 12 to however many years we've been at it.
He was the team that threw everything out.
Right. But he is completely restarted, and will redshirt all of his guys. Kansas State is doing the same thing. So he's really, and Army's stuck in the middle. So he's really playing 1, 2, 3, 4 without playing me. You'd probably throw me in the bottom 4 as well of the Big 12. He's probably
You're not
playing.
In the North though. You're in the South.
Oh yeah, no, I know, but like I'm talking about like the entire conference. Like,
sure.
If you put the whole conference together, he's probably playing the bottom 5 teams. Yeah. So he's gotten kind of just kind of how the Big 12 falls there. I think you're going to see like the uptick. The Big 12 the better teams are going to be like your Houstons, your SMUs, your Texas Techs, even Oklahoma State's gotten somewhat better, and they're all in the South, whereas the North seems to be fading fast.
We're going to get to it. I think the North's got some good top-end teams. I don't think they're nearly as good as a group as the South. The South is a little bit better, but I think he benefits from a really soft schedule this year. I don't think we've noted it, but I think the biggest benefit for this team is they have C.J. Stroud. I think this is our first copy of C.J. Stroud we've seen some Purdy's and stuff like that. If C.J. Stroud even reaches remotely what he did, I think he's going to carry a few teams, just like I think he did for Cincinnati last year. Or did he play Tua? One of the two. But I think Stroud could carry a few teams to a few.
He redshirted Stroud last year.
So yeah, if anything, I think he's got a really easy schedule. He's got to score points to carry himself forward, or hope some teams stumble. That's absolutely necessary. And then I think Stroud could potentially be a difference maker if things break the right way. But that's Cincinnati, number 20. Yeah, number 20. Number 19, moving to the Big Ten East. A lot of Big Ten teams so far. That's Navy. Navy is a defending champion. Won the Big Ten East, I think, again last year. So I think it's won it twice. Projected to be, I think, right outside the top 25 or right around it with scoring wise. Definitely lost some assets last year with, I think it had Jalen Hurts and a few other guys. Tried to retool with like Marvin Harrison Jr. and things like that, but still has some good assets. I don't think it's nearly as talented as it had a year ago or even 2 years ago. Plays a pretty decent schedule, especially non-conference wise. But the Big Ten East is a bit of a softer division, just like we were talking about the Big 12 North. No real scares. I think Navy's going to kind of waltz through it, maybe even sleepwalking, but could potentially be there for an auto bid because of that soft schedule. But still will score some points. Don't think it's nearly as good as it was last year. But yeah, Navy and Salvo, their coach, is pretty savvy with this stuff. So I imagine he's ready to hit the rebuild or reset and retool his team quickly here.
Yeah, I like Navy. I have Navy at 17. They were 11-2 last year. I don't think. Yeah. I'm trying to think. Looking at them, like I just, again, you're another team with Brock Purdy, which we talked about. But then there's some good, like Jerome Ford's going to pick up some run, and we haven't talked about him yet. He'll have some run for at least the first half of the season. There's a Najee Harris, which I think none of them have graduated yet, so I think that's just kind of, he's got the last one hanging around. Some of the other depth guys you're talking about, like not great, but like solid pieces in Tyjae Spears, Stevenson, Jalen Warren. So I think it's a team that has some good depth to it, and I think that again, if it's a savvy owner that can kind of figure out how to maneuver this, I think he's in good shape. But it's also, for as much depth that it has at the running back position, it's lacking that at wide receiver. But again, the one thing I think I had him just because of schedule, just projected wins. But like this is a team that could easily start out like 0-3, and then just run through the Big Ten there, because I think that they have. Do you have it? Yeah. Sorry, I was looking to see what you had on your screen, but they have Marshall, and we'll talk about them at some point. Boise State's really good, even though I don't think I had them ranked. West Virginia's higher. I'm high on West Virginia, just being in the Big 12. I like them, and so like there's a chance that Navy goes 0-3, and then runs the table the rest of the way, even though they have a projected loss week 9 against Ohio State. I don't think there's too many of the other matchups that are relatively close in terms of projections. So it's more of a schedule thing for me, but it is a solid team. And again, I'll just not like bitter or anything, but we are starting 4 running backs, and for a team that has running back depth, that rule change definitely helps Navy.
I think for sure, given that they had quite a few graduating wide receivers from last year that they lost out to. I don't think they had CD, but I think they had some other senior assets like Ayuk and stuff like that. No, they didn't have Ayuk, but Debo. I think they had Debo and pieces like that too. So yeah, definitely benefits. So number 18, we are back to the Big 12. Tulsa, a surprising team from last year. I don't think anyone thought Tulsa was going to be nearly as good as they ended up being. Projected to even be better this year. I think when we talked about the recruiting video, this was a team, Lou, you were pointing out, making some very curious decisions around, especially quarterback. Has a lot of depth at quarterback, if I remember, with like 3 different quarterbacks now on roster. Don't think they'll need all of them this year. Definitely helps their depth when it comes to assets, but has some projected good teams. We mentioned the Big 12 North already. This is another team that's supposed to play a pretty soft division schedule and an even softer non-conference schedule with teams like San Jose State and Arizona State, which are supposed to be pretty low on the projections. So going to benefit a lot. Is going to likely need some help. Is projected, I think, to one of its 2 losses is by like 0.6 points or something like that to Marshall. So a good team. Could be there for a conference championship if a few games break its way, because it's playing on a softer schedule.
Yeah, I like Tulsa. I thought Tulsa had a chance to be a much better team than what they've currently got on paper. Going back to your point of the auction, this was a team that had Brock Purdy and then elected to spend $61 on Trevor Lawrence.
For a single year of Trevor Lawrence, not
right for a single year of Trevor Lawrence at 61, and then doubled down and spent another $61 on JJ McCarthy. So they spent $122 on quarterbacks when they had Brock Purdy. And I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that they're going to start Brock Purdy every single week. I mean, maybe except for the bye week. I don't know, but that's what I would. I mean,
they ain't starting McCarthy. McCarthy's got an easy redshirt option, but
so it's just a team that could have done a lot better. I think the only other major pickups were Blake Corum and Roman Wilson, but super solid team. They were, again, like, I think they surprised. They were at 8-5 or 9-4 last year, something like that. I think, again, with the schedule, the Big 12 is weak, and again, part of that was because it's been weak, but then we've also had teams to, for whatever reason, just kind of decide to go into rebuild mode, and it's not even like a slow rebuild. It's like burn it down to the studs type of rebuilds going on in the Big 12. And so in terms of projections on there, you're going to see teams that kind of get propped up by that. But it'll be interesting. Big 12 is always kind of interesting, but I do think that this is one of the more like solid teams within the division. I can't remember if I said where I had them right. I have them slightly higher than wherever we were talking about. I have them all the way up inside.
Up inside?
I got them. Up inside the top 15. I've got them at 13. They're sitting comfortably up inside. So they're at 13 for me. I just kind of again, with the easy schedule and then just kind of the solidness of the team there. They really have a chance probably to go undefeated. I don't know what the projections have them losing, but I can't imagine.
Right now they're projected to lose to Mississippi State in week 3 and then Marshall in week 8. The only other close game projected is week 11 against West Virginia, and they're supposed to win by less than a point. So the games that are tight could go either way, which could really impact their ability to like do well. They're already projected to have 2 losses against teams that are ranked higher than them. And I think if those things go that way, they're likely right on the cusp of the playoff consideration for at-large. If any one of these games, like, I don't know, they get caught by Oklahoma or SMU in weeks 4 or 5, then it might get a little dicey because, again, the softer schedule does potentially hurt you if you're not playing enough difficult opponents, and other teams are. They get a benefit over that. So if they're getting caught by some other teams, they could be in some trouble. But yeah, otherwise, I think they will be pretty decent. We are going to move all the way to Minor. Minor has its first team in the top 25 for this season, and it is Kent State. The alma mater of Taylor Nosering Zijakowski, whatever, how you say his stupid Polish name or whatever. Their new coach is projected to have a really good season this year. Has Anthony Richardson, one of the few quarterbacks projected to have over 200 points. Supposed to really waltz through the MAC outside of one really tough game against Central Michigan. Really light schedule. Most of that's because of the division. Does try to play some tougher opponents with Northwestern and Alabama this season, but otherwise supposed to rack up the wins. Does have a pretty good team with Richardson, Chase, Walker, Gibbs, Marvin Harrison Jr., Devonta Smith. Depth is a little concerning. It's pretty much that roster of 8. So if he can stay healthy, score a bunch of points, I think he'll be up there. He's kind of a glass cannon team, as most minor teams are. But, yeah, I think this is Kent State's shot at being relevant this year, which is ironic for the first year Taylor's not at the helm.
Yeah, and I think it was a weird process getting there. I think the off season went way differently than like it would have if Taylor was there, and it's not a shot against Taylor, but
take shots against Taylor. Do it.
No, Kent State was one when I was kind of watching how they handled the offseason. It was a little bit more aggressive than I thought it should be. Like, they went pretty hard for Devonta Smith. Want to say, like, ridiculously hard. $79. So a good bit of the budget was put to that.
I think they also transferred Rashad White. If I remember correctly, they transferred Rashad White, spent a bunch on Devonta Smith, and then spent even more on Marvin Harrison Jr.
Right. It was a weird process.
Yeah, weird set of events.
And it seems to have helped in terms of top end talent, but again, like, there's nothing on this team behind whatever 8 they're rolling out. Like, you have no depth. And again, you're benefiting because the minor's weaker, but just for me, I think we've seen, like, I've been in the minor, we've been at this for a little bit. Minor has to be like a team for them to come out and be this high. They've got to be better than that. Like, if we remember the first year or two, Buffalo was really, really, really good, and even, winning games in minor and winning the games that they scheduled the first couple of weeks. Like, it took them that full kind of season to put together the full resume to get them inside the top 15, the top 10, top 8, wherever they finished. And for me, I don't think that Kent State's it. I have one or two. I got 2 teams definitely finishing higher in minor than Kent State, and there might be like a third team that's worth mentioning. And so I'm just not sold. Yeah. I really like.
Have them ranked.
No, I don't have them ranked. I bumped them out. I have 2 different teams ranked in minor. Central Michigan, which I'm sure we'll talk about. If we don't, that's a shame. Utah State should be ranked, but not in this point. Like, they'd be much lower, somewhere in the 20s.
You did have Utah State higher, but Utah State is not projected to make the top 25 in the coaches poll.
But they're I think that's a team that's probably better. And then I want to say I had them ranked higher until they made a asinine comment in the group chat, and so I dropped them. But I want to say that where is it at? I want to say that Ball State might be good.
I think Ball State will be good. I think they were right.
Yeah, it might be Ball State. I think Ball State's another one that could. I had to look on my sheet to see where I had, but again, solid quarterback play from Ball State. Good running, solid good running backs. Like, there's 4, 5 running backs, maybe 6. I mean, there's a good there's a good bit of running backs there, and then if you just have to start, if you just are throwing in, 2 wide receivers, Garrett Wilson and Jalen Waddle aren't bad options. So I think that Ball State's going to be really tough too. So I'm not sure that. Again, I've learned with minor you go with the depth over the top heavy stuff, and so I just think that there's probably three. What is that? 3 teams that are probably more solid than Kent State.
Yeah, the only benefit is Utah State, the teams you mentioned, does not play any of those other MAC teams that we talked about, which is kind of a shame that we don't really have any representation from the Mountain West. So it might be worth dwelling on what Utah State is looking like. To your point about Ball State had 5 top 25 votes.
Good. They were on my short list of teams, and then he made some comment. I'm not even in Glue, but you can like hover over the hashtag they put in there, and he wrote some ridiculous shit, and so I was like, nope, kicked him off my top 25. So he's probably a top.
Unbelievable.
You know what? That's part of like coaching. I don't know what you call that, discipline or coaching, like mindset or whatever. And he dropped the ball there for me, so I had to. I've been playing a lot of NCAA football, so I had to kind of weigh how that takes its course over the season, and so I bumped him. He's
You knocked
probably
down
he's
his
probably a
coaching
tough.
prestige.
Yeah, his prestige pedigree. So he's probably sitting around 30 now for me instead of towards the bottom of the top 25.
As it relates to Utah State, I brought them up because we're not going to talk about any Mountain West teams in this coaches poll as it stands. They're supposed to walk through the division. I think outside of maybe one game against New Mexico State and Nevada, they're supposed to walk through it. And even those games, they're supposed to win sizably. They do have a pretty good depth. Daniels, I'm trying to remember, they have Levis, right?
Yeah, Daniels, Levis, then at running back, Kyron Williams, Rashad White, Brian Robinson, Khalil Herbert's there. What the hell? Who's the old guy who tore both his ACLs?
Cam Akers?
Yeah, Akers is there, and he looked halfway somewhat usable. Then wide receivers, I don't remember.
Wide receivers is definitely where he makes it up with Nakua, London, Dell, Rasheed Rice.
Michael Wilson.
A lot more depth on that team.
Tutu Atwell. And then there's some other like interesting guys just depth guys like Fonte Turpin. Who else? Rondell Moore, but he got hurt, so like that would have been a nice piece to have. But yeah, so I think that there's enough like top heaviness on Utah State when you're talking about like Kyron Williams, Rashad White, even Brian Robinson, then to mix it off with the depth and Puka Nakua, like those guys are top end guys, but then to mix it off with like Rasheed Rice's and Tank Dell's, those are just nice depth pieces, and I think that in terms of if you're gonna weigh something where you've got I don't know 10, 12 options on that team that you could start putting your starting 8 versus Kent State where you really only have 8. If something goes wrong, Kent State's gonna suffer. And it's not even like an injury could go wrong. It's just like somebody has a bad week. If you only have 8 guys, like you're not going to be able to recover from that.
Yeah, I think Utah State, for this example, they do play a tougher non-conference schedule than Kent State does. But Oregon State, who we talked about, and then Michigan, who is actually a pretty tough out projected to be this year. I do think if it does have the cakewalk that it's projected to have, it could catch some teams where it's winning enough games that it elevates them higher, especially if some teams stumble and lose some games that they're supposed to win, which undoubtedly happens. So I do think Utah State's a good team. I don't know if I put them in the top 25, though, for myself. I used a pretty loose, very basic projection thing this year for my own rankings. No, I didn't. Should have probably thought about them, but they did get 5 votes, and then we did talk about Ball State, so I'll dwell on them because gives Chuck some love.
No, his coaching pedigree, prestige down the window. There's no
I
recruits
don't
coming
think
there.
that,
Skip them.
but really soft schedule. Again, we've talked about the MAC, and then plays teams like Florida State, Notre Dame. Really, the only tough outs is Ohio State, Central Michigan, and Kent State on its schedule, which most of those games is supposed to lose. So if Chuck played tougher schedules, he probably got a little more love in the projections this way. He's supposed to come out, you know, halfway decent, but really needs some high scoring and his depth to come through. He's going to win quite a few games this year regardless, and did get 5 top 25 votes. All around 25. So I think everyone who did vote for him thought he's right there at the cusp, so he could be another minor team. So we talked about minor quite in depth there, more than I thought we were going to. We are going to move on to I forgot what number we were on.
16.
Penn State, 16. Oh, NC State. Cool. We're going to talk about Jake now. Jake at NC State. Jake does again, just like last year, the same thing is going to play out. This division that the ACC Atlantic is a fucking bloodbath. It's a war zone. I don't know what happened here, but they've like really consolidated the teams, and they're all falling on one side of the division. And then they had all the just chaos that happened with the transfer market this year, with teams consolidating further, like Clemson and North Carolina, but still has to play a really tough division schedule, projected to lose 4 of those games against some really tough opponents, plays a kind of middling non-conference schedule with Kansas State and Arizona State, but man didn't really do himself some favors, is really going to be relying on a rookie quarterback this year with Caleb Williams. Does have some really good pieces with Amon-Ra St. Brown, Gibbs, and Walker. I don't think he got another quarterback, did he? He didn't even get the handcuff to Caleb? I think it's just one, and that's it, right?
No, he doesn't have any.
Caleb. Yeah, so he's going to have, like, week 7 against Syracuse might doom his season right there and then, where he's playing without Caleb Williams, whereas Syracuse has Brock Purdy and Daniels to rely upon that week. So, like, just losing those games because of bye weeks could probably really hamper his ability to play for the division. I think because of the gaping hole he had at quarterback this year really set him back to being able to add some quality pieces to his roster, but he did plug that hole with the best asset possible this season and is going to win some games and is going to put up points, but plays a really tough division, and then his QB depth is obviously an area of concern, and he's not the only team that has to deal with that factor. But I'm not sure if you have thoughts on that and the ACC Atlantic as a whole.
Yeah, I think, again, I've talked about it a couple of times, but the rule change affects Jake probably more so than any other team in the top 25. And he kind of kind of tried to fix that, I guess, and it just kind of fell apart on him. And it didn't help that I think he was trying to fight over, was it Tua that was available? I can't remember.
Yeah, Tua was available in the ACC. I think that was the only one. And he lost out to North Carolina, who also needed a quarterback desperately. And so his pivot was to put all of his money onto Caleb. Not all of it. He didn't spend all of his money, but he had to devote a sizable portion of his resources towards Caleb Williams.
Yeah, but I mean, he's still solid. I had him slightly lower. I mean, he's still going to be good, but I just not sure that he's this good. I think I had him at the bottom, like 23rd or something. Uh, just because of, I don't know, just lack of, same thing that we've talked about earlier, lack of sure thing at quarterback. But then as you kind of round things out, you're talking about like he's gonna have to rely on like Zamir White to step up. Like if that happens, I think maybe he's in a better spot. But right now, this is a team that was kind of built around having three solid running backs, and then obviously, he had some graduates at wide receiver, but the depth there. The Amon-Ra St. Browns, Rashid Shaheed, Tank Dell, Garrett Wilson. I think he would have liked it to be like, okay, throw a couple more, throw a couple bucks at wide receiver and get things done. But he had to get caught up in the Caleb Williams sweepstakes because he didn't land a quarterback in the upperclassmen.
My dog's going wild. Yeah, I think it's just an unfortunate circumstance. He probably made the best that he could out of it, and went with the most well-known asset he could possibly grab instead of risking it with like a Bo Nix or a Drake May, where you're not kind of confident that they're going to start. Caleb was always going to start day one. Probably could have maybe looked at like a Jaden Daniels a little more closely, because I imagine he had a cheaper asset, but that's here nor there. Caleb could, if he blows, up and becomes, as good as like CJ Stroud, he's going to carry a team much farther. So that is NC State. I think at this point, Lou's got to step off for some other commitment stuff. I'm going to keep going, and we'll move into the top 15 teams. Lou, thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate your time, sir.
Yeah, sorry, I would stay, but I got a phone call, so I got to go.
Yep. We'll talk to you later. Thank you, sir. All right. Number 15. Moving to the SEC, finally. We're talking about Mississippi State, Brahmy's team. Team that got 10 top 25 votes this year. Brahmy last year did a lot of wins, had a very, very weak opponent schedule, and it, I think, cost him quite a few movement in the rankings. He probably wouldn't have won as many games, but it definitely held him back from reaching what he thought he deserved. It's supposed to be a way better team this year. Did bring in talent like Jamar Chase from the transfer portal, so definitely shoring up and making that offensive wide receiver position better. Got places like Keon Coleman in there to help plug some depth. And it has one of the very few Jonathan Taylor copies, which is, based on the projection, supposed to be a real value add here. Has a pretty decent off-season schedule. I think probably one of the tougher ones with Boise, USC, and Tulsa this year. And then plays in, again, we're seeing it more and more. Some divisions are just not nearly as good, and if you were to compare the SEC East to the West, historically, the West has proven to be lighter. So, does play some weaker cross-conference opponents with Florida and Tennessee. Still plays some cupcake teams with Texas A&M and Ole Miss and Auburn. Only loss this year is supposed to be to Arkansas, and I think most of that has to do with bye weeks. So it has the advantage of a lot of bye weeks, but Week 12 seems to be a killer with bye weeks this year in the NFL season. So that could prove a downfall in terms of the ability to push for a division championship and a conference championship. Likely going to be right there at the cusp around the playoffs with an at-large bid if he can win some of these games and no one sneaks up and wins one up from him. So that's Brahmy. Number 14, we're moving back to the ACC Atlantic with Syracuse. Syracuse is run by Walter. Walter's team, I think last year did really, really well, if I remember correctly. I think they played... I don't think they made the conference championship, but they played very well and is supposed to have another equally good team. Has some really good quarterback depth. Projected to have the second best depth in the league as it stands with two quarterbacks and a ton of other pieces. has players like Collins, Pacheco, Ramondre Stevenson, Drake London. Has a decent non-conference schedule. Kentucky week 1 is projected to be a college game day game, so really tough schedule. A really tough game the first week against Kentucky. Nevada, as we mentioned, is not nearly as bad team, but does seem to catch some breaks if you were to look at this from a schedule perspective against some teams with bye weeks. Clemson, who we haven't talked about, seems to also have a lot of byes, and this is where depth really becomes a value. If you play a team and you both have bye weeks and you got some better depth behind it, you can play better those weeks. Other games that, NC State looks like he catches them in a nice week, and then plays some pretty softer. Miami's not that soft, but UConn is a little softer of an opponent in the cross-conference matchups. I think Walter's going to play very well. Going to be right there for the division for the ACC this season, and will be very, very competitive. The only loss is projected in the conferences to Wake Forest. All right, number 13 is... Sorry, I'm losing my spot here. Let's go here. Georgia. Should have known that. Georgia. Our defending national champion. Daryl of Georgia. Daryl got 9 top 25 votes. Got a little love, I think, because of being a defending champion, if I remember hearing some people say. Lost some players last year. I think he had CeeDee Lamb, so big loss there to fill. And I think had T. Higgins and stuff like that. Still supposed to be really good. Supposed to have players like Daniels come in. I think he had Justin Fields, and obviously with that vacancy needed to fill it with something. So does have Jaden Daniels, does have Will Levis on his team, but has some really good assets with ETN, Chase, White, Wilson. Pickens is supposed to be one of his better pieces. I think he's going to be a good team. Plays a pretty weak schedule, though, and that might be what holds him back. If he played maybe a little tougher off-season schedule, he could probably be creeping up in the rankings a bit more. But I think overall he's doomed to go head-to-head against Kentucky this season in the East. It seems like those two are the two teams that are going to battle it out in the East. And seems to fall short the last week of the season. I think last year he got the better end of Kentucky the last week. So they seem to play each other around the last couple games of the season, which seem to have decided the last few division titles for that division in the SEC, and looks like they're about to do battle again. So that's number 13. Number 12 is Houston. Our first Big 12 South team. Houston. Houston's another team that was missing a quarterback. We had seen to have a theme where some teams that had Jalen Hurts graduate last year who carried their squad. They had to fill it with some startable asset, and they put a lot of money. I think they put $150 to Jaden Daniels to secure that for this season to have someone to play. They still have a bunch of players to play around them with Jonathan Taylor, Amon-Ra St. Brown. If he had like a CJ Stroud, that'd probably be like the closest penultimate top 3 you could have position. Puka Nacua is there. Does play in the South, and as we talked about earlier, South is a little light. And plays a kind of a middling non-conference schedule where I think Houston's going to be okay. The only real tough out this year is supposed to be Marshall, who's projected to lose. Everyone else is going to be kind of middling. Maybe a slight hiccup could be there against Oklahoma in Week 7. But Jake and Houston's looking like a good team. I think they're projected to win the Big 12 South pretty easily and comfortably. So we'll see how well that goes. Moving to 11, we're moving to our last Big 12, our SEC West team, and that is Arkansas. Arkansas is one of the 4 teams projected to win all their games. Coached by Robbie, got 5 top 10 votes, 8 total. Not sure why he didn't get more top 25 votes, but got the people that voted for him thought he's going to be a good team. Was another team that was missing a quarterback this year after I think Burrow graduated last year. Plugged that in with senior Tua Tagovailoa, and does have a really good team around him. Kyron Williams, Pacheco, Gibbs, Devonta Smith, Chris Olave, Drake London are all really good starters to have. Did pick up Bo Nix, I think, in the auction, which will even help with depth if he needs it later on in the season. I don't think he will, but you never know. Plays a pretty light schedule, though. I think it's projected to be the 99th worst or easiest schedule. I guess one of the easiest schedules, however you want to frame that. So if it could hold him back in terms of getting a high enough seed or ranking throughout the year, because he's playing some really light opponents with like Florida and Missouri as cross conference, playing Notre Dame. Does play his rival, his brother Ryan, shout out Ryan, and Arkansas State in Week 1, which is really supposed to be his toughest matchup outside of maybe LSU in Week 8. So plays really soft. Not sure what to do with this. It seems like it's his division to lose, outside of maybe Mississippi State, but I think he gets the benefit of some bye weeks. So that's number 11. We're now moving into the top 10, and we move to the Big 12 North. Big 12 North coach is West Virginia at the top 10 spot, coached by Bobby. Bobby's had a pretty decent team. I think each year he gets better and better, and this year's no exception. Plays a pretty tough non-conference schedule, if you ask me. All Big 10 teams. Must really want to challenge himself with Big 10. Plays Iowa, Ohio State, Navy. Plays some much softer cross-conference teams from the South, and Baylor and Texas. And then his 2 losses this year projected to be against Cincinnati and Tulsa. If he could flip one of those, I think he could jump, because he is projected to beat Marshall. And be up in contention, but right now he's slated to finish 3rd in the division, in the Big 12 North, which is very much shaping up to be the tougher of the 2 divisions this year out of the Big 12. I think Bobby's got a good team. We'll see how well Caleb Williams does. If he booms or busts higher than what he's projected, I think that'll make or break West Virginia's season here. Moving on to number 9, I think we're up to... Who's that here? Getting more into a consensus at this point. We are up to LD's team. Second highest. I think our first Pac-12 South team, actually. Pac-12 South, very top-heavy, it seems like, this year. And Colorado State is projected to benefit pretty well from that. LD, I think last year had much better record than anticipated. With CJ Stroud coming on, and some other assets playing very well, is projected to still finish 2nd in the division. I think it's supposed to be due to a .30 points loss in Week 10 to Air Force. I think that costs him the projected division. Plays a middling to weak off-season schedule, plays some much tougher cross-conference in Oregon and Boise. I like LD's team. I think he's got a great he's turned his team around after his second season where he didn't win many games, and has put some much better pieces around him. I think he does benefit from a very soft Pac-12 South with some really easy games against UCLA and Utah and Arizona State and Arizona. But if he can win the other middling teams of USC, Colorado, and if he can definitely flip Air Force's outcome, I think this guy is looking at a division title for sure. Number 8 is our favorite ACC team, the perennial preseason number 1, Clemson. Number 1 in our hearts is what I mean. Didn't get voted that way. Only got 10 top 25 votes out of 14. 7 of them were in the top 10, 5 of them in the top 5. People definitely think this team is there. Was one that needed to retool a little bit, and definitely did, and grab some assets in the transfer portal to make this team right there to compete again after another season. First 6 positions are really solid. Lawrence, Kyron Williams, Bijan, Nico Collins, Jamar Chase, and Travis Etienne, and still has more depth behind that. A little worried about the QB situation if something happens. He doesn't really have a backup. Is projected to score really well. I think outside of week 12 or some bye week catch him, he's projected to score a lot of points. I think like the 6th most projected points out of the year. Projected to tie and I think win the division. I'll have to double check that one, but very good team. I think Daniel's going to have a very competitive team this season, so look out for Clemson. We're moving up to number 7 here, or number 7. Why am I missing number 7? Double check my ranking here. Did someone tie? Oh, sorry to keep you waiting. I think someone tied. Didn't even realize that. Central Michigan. All right, our top minor team. Central Michigan made the playoffs last year as an at-large bid. Got 11 top 25 votes, 8 in the top 10 and 1 in the top 5. Projected as one of the 4 teams to go undefeated this year. Does play a very soft schedule, as noted with other minor teams. Likely should have probably tried to slate some much tougher competition than Boston College and UCLA this year, but Brian's projected to have the best team in minor, sweep the division. Has Lawrence, Chase, Pacheco, Gibbs, Devon Achane, Jalen Waddles, Zamir White, Sam Laporta. Has depth around his pieces outside of those guys, as well as some top-end talent. If he loses any game, like loses to Kent State or Northern Illinois or Ball State, I think we could see him tumble down the rankings a bit, given his weaker opponent all play, but definitely supposed to hold his own when it comes to defending his minor conference championship this year again. That's Central Michigan, their top minor team this year, so congrats to him. Moving to number 6, this is our top SEC team, and that is Kentucky. Kentucky is the defending... No, not defending. I don't know why I said that. They lost to Georgia last year, as I alluded to earlier, but was right there at the end. Forgive me, he's always in a position, Devin, to have a competitive team. Always is. Another team that needed a quarterback badly plugs in Jaden Daniels to fill in his set of his stable of starters. Has Jonathan Taylor, has Amon-Ra St. Brown, Puka Nacua, Kenneth Walker. Has a bevy of running backs to use this year. Only one loss projected, and that's supposed to come in week 3 against North Carolina. I think good team. I would be remiss to think he doesn't have just a easy shot at winning the division. I think he's just that good. Unless something drastic happens with an injury, which I don't see. I think his depth is pretty decent too. I think Devin's going to be looking pretty rosy here this season. So Devin and Kentucky come in at number 6. Number 5, I think, is number 5. Air Force. Our preseason number 1 last year. Still supposed to be really good. Was missing a quarterback. Last year had a lot of issues with injuries, causing him to not play as well. Still could be a concern this year. Has plugged in Bo Nix, plugged in Marvin Harrison Jr. to fill in his really good lineup of Amon-Ra St. Brown, Bijan, Breece Hall, Ramondre Stevenson. Plays, like we mentioned with Colorado State, plays in a little slightly weaker Pac-12 South. Very soft non-conference schedule. Florida, Kansas, Fresno State should be easy walks. Should be some easy wins. But if he loses any of these games against USC, Colorado State, he could fall down the board. Is one of the 4 projected undefeated teams. Last year was projected to be undefeated in the preseason. It definitely didn't work out that way. But I think he will be good again, especially if he stays healthy. He's going to be contending for something there for sure in the postseason. So that's Air Force at number 5. We're up to 4, and that goes to Wake Forest. David of Wake Forest had a pretty decent team last year. I think he was a 9-4. Not quite as good. As we kind of noted earlier, he plays in the ACC Atlantic, which is going to be a tougher out. Like losses to just losing to Clemson and losses to North Carolina. If I were to have guessed, I would have probably suggested maybe not play North Carolina this year and maybe try to find a different opponent to play in the cross-conference to make it a little easier on the division. Plays a pretty easy schedule non-conference-wise with his only real competition is Washington State this year. Which, speaking of, we haven't really talked about any Pac-12 North teams, thinking about it now, outside of Oregon State. So Wade is supposed to be a good team. Washington State, I think that they're potentially going to be a game day game this year. As a reminder, any games that is projected to have an average ranking between 2 teams for that week, 15 and under, is a game day where each team will be awarded 1, and then the top game will be awarded $2 for being the top game day game. Wake Forest, I think, will be good. Really there to help and bolster the competitive fight that's going to come out of the Atlantic. I think any team that's going to come out of the Atlantic is going to be, especially if they can come with wins. If a lot of teams are winning games and losing games, they're going to hurt each other in terms of the rankings and probably make it so there's only like a couple teams that go to the playoffs this year. But if these teams win, or if a couple teams win a lot of the games that they're supposed to, they're going to really rise in the rankings. And Wake Forest being 4 shouldn't really be a surprise. Number 3 is North Carolina, so we're staying in the ACC. The Tar Heels, coached by Matt. Really good team. There was another team that was missing a quarterback to fit his already really good team. Filled it with this offseason in the transfer portal with Tua. Has a bunch of other pieces with Taylor, Chase, Breece Hall, Isaiah Pacheco, Gibbs. Like, that's a really good top 5. Plays in as mentioned, the Coastal, very light conference. So took a much tougher non-conference schedule than I think most. We're playing myself and Wisconsin, LSU, Kentucky is going to be another tough out, and Wake Forest. The first 4 weeks is no small feat. So even if he ends up 2-2 out of those top 4 weeks, I think he'll make it up on the back end to still be a really good team, especially as he gets into the later season where he's playing Georgia Tech, UConn, Virginia, and Virginia Tech. I think he's going to make up his wins there to be right where he needs to be at the end of the season. So that's Matt and North Carolina. Really solid team this season. And number 2 is Marshall. Marshall is our year 1 national champion, has been contending the entire time this league's been operating. Jay has put together a well-rounded roster, has continued to plug in transfers to make his team even better while still finding rookies to supplement it all. I think even this year the same recipe, putting more upperclassmen in. I think he got Gibbs for like $123 from Kansas in the transfer portal, so plug in almost 150-point projected scorer, and that's going to make your team even better. Does play in the Big 12 North, which could be the more contentious conference, and does play cross-conference wise Oklahoma and Houston. So didn't really do himself too many favors when it comes to the scheduling and what options he has available to him. So schedule a little harder, and then still plays teams like Navy and Tulane, which are good teams. And we talked about Navy earlier. So I think Jay and Marshall are going to be astounding. Got 11 top 25 votes. Got 1 single first place vote, but got a ton of top 5 votes. So everyone felt very confident that he was a top 5 team. I agree with that sentiment. And we'll likely see how well he can hold against a pretty decent and tight division. And with number 1, it is myself. Got 13 votes in the top 25, 12 first place votes. I think the only vote I didn't get in the first place by people who voted was LD, put me at 17. Said in the chat that I was to help me with the preseason curse, because anyone that seems to get put in the top number 1 in the preseason rankings doesn't do so hot, with Clemson and Air Force, recent teams that had stumbled after being almost unanimously voted number 1 by their peers. For me, I think I have a well-rounded roster. I think I have pretty good depth. My schedule is kind of a mixed bag. I don't think I play very difficult. I don't think I play really easy. I have a bunch of teams: Texas Tech, North Carolina week 1, Northwestern, Iowa, Illinois, all really good, solid teams that are going to score points. And then I play some weaker teams like Michigan State and Purdue and Notre Dame and those things like that should hopefully kind of give me enough of where I need to be. I did spend all my money this year on upperclassmen, getting players like Breece Hall, Devonta Smith to round out my roster. I did have some pretty good assets already in place with Nakua, Chase, Bijan, and Lawrence, as well as Kenneth Walker. So I think my team definitely is warranted with being good. The big question, as I'm going to always say, is QB. I was not able to secure a second QB with a known starting option. I have been able to secure handcuffs, which are about your next best option when it comes to running a 1 QB strategy. So I think this team is good. We'll see if it makes its way through this. It would be cool to have it do well, but as we've seen, history seems to say preseason number 1s don't tend to live up to their billing. So that's the top 25. As I have shared with this module that people have available to them, we run a projection. Here's the projections for teams as we sit with the end of the regular season. So using all those projected points, we are able to tabulate kind of what's your record and where you stack up. So by the end of the season, Wisconsin, Marshall, North Carolina, Kentucky, Air Force, Clemson, Central Michigan, Colorado State, Houston, Arkansas, Mississippi, Wake Forest, West Virginia, Kent State, Georgia, Syracuse, Oregon State, Tulsa, Cincinnati, Navy, Michigan, who we did not talk about but has a really good team, NC State, Duke, Utah State, who we did talk about, and Ball State are all supposed to be in the top 25 by the end of the season. So a lot of teams we talked about, a few near the end of the top 25 that we didn't really dwell on, with some teams like SMU, Northwestern, Illinois, Colorado, Nebraska, who are just looking on the outside in, who could very well, things break their way, 1 or 2 games that could percolate up to the top. So that's what it's supposed to be at the end of week 12. Move to player awards. Right now, as of right now, the projected Heisman this year is supposed to go to Anthony Richardson of Michigan. This would be the second national award that Michigan has won. I think they won one with, was it Debo? I think Debo, the first season, they got a National Player Award. So that's something to note for Michigan. They're supposed to do well, and Anthony Richardson's supposed to carry his team a long way and have a lot more value than other copies, which is the whole intention of these awards. Followed by Kent State's Anthony Richardson's copy, Colorado State's C.J. Stroud. A lot of the C.J. Strouds and Anthony Richardsons, because they're projected to score northwards of 200 points, you'll see at the top of these projections commonly. And then for running backs, the top running back is projected to be Mississippi State's Jonathan Taylor, because it scores so many points and has a sizable portion. As for wide receivers, Air Force's copy of Amon-Ra St. Brown is projected to be the top point getter for wide receivers, and most of the copies related to Amon-Ra, because so much higher projection, like 10, 15 points, 20 points higher than the next closest wide receiver. You see a lot of those copies. This doesn't convey conference awards, but you can see, if you were to look at a conference, kind of which player copies you maybe want to keep an eye on if you're a team and wanting to keep track of awards that might be coming your team's way. You can kind of see who might do what this season. So that's the projected player awards. As we move to the projected postseason, this will be the last thing we talk about. Conference-wise, conference championships, we see Washington State and Air Force in the Pac-12. Given that Washington State's projected to win the division, let's spend some time with them, because we did not talk about them very much. So Wade, we mentioned them briefly, but Washington State played very well. I think they won their division last year, if I don't recall. Does play a little tougher off non-conference schedule. I think that's probably what hurts them the most in these projections. Playing Wake Forest and Clemson are two really tough outs that they're projected to lose. Plays much softer cross-conference teams and beats Oregon State, who's the other projected top Pac-12 team, but also stumbles a few times throughout the rest of the season with losses projected to Boise and, surprisingly, Cal, that I think could really mix the bag in the Pac-12. But right now, supposed to win, and I think a lot of that has to do with the Week 6 game against Oregon State. That tiebreaker, if they're tied with the division, could prove very beneficial for whoever's supposed to win that. So that's Week 13 with the Pac-12. Week 13 for Big 12, when it comes to the championship, is supposed to be Marshall versus Houston, who we talked about in the top 25. That game is supposed to go to Marshall projectedly. SEC, Kentucky versus Arkansas. Again, those top two projected teams are supposed to be there, with Kentucky winning out. Big Ten, we talked about Navy kind of running through the Big Ten East really easily, and then myself with the Big Ten West, with Wisconsin winning against Navy in the championship. And then in the minor, we talked about these two teams as well, Central Michigan and Utah State fighting, with Central Michigan winning. And then in the ACC, I think this is a rematch of last year with North Carolina and Clemson playing each other once again. I want to make sure I'm giving that justice if that was who ended up there last year or not. Oh, sorry. Wow. Last year it was Syracuse, not Clemson that made it there. But Clemson and North Carolina are projected to be there for the conference championship games. You could see a bunch of teams that made the bowl games: Miami, New Mexico State, Arkansas State, Fresno State, and Western Michigan somehow get enough games to be bowl eligible. Reminder, only need 6 wins. A bunch of dregs that have no business really winning 6 games will play a bunch of teams that they can win games, and they will sneak into winning a bowl game. So teams like Western Michigan and Fresno State are likely culprits for that. Washington and TCU is supposed to be a pretty decent bowl game. Vanderbilt, Northern Illinois, Illinois versus Michigan, and then Oregon State versus Tulsa are kind of teams that you'll see rounding out the bowl game. So what does that mean for our playoff? Our 16-team playoff field is projected to be 1 through 16. Myself, Marshall is number 2. Number 3 is North Carolina State. Number 4, Kentucky. Number 5, Air Force. 6, Central Michigan. 7, Clemson. 8, Colorado State. 9, Houston. 10, Arkansas. 11, Mississippi State. Wake Forest. West Virginia. Georgia gets in at 15. And number 16 is supposed to be Syracuse. So that's our field of 16 playoff teams. You can see who is projected to win with not a lot of upsets. The only ones really being notable are West Virginia and Wake Forest. Will be fair, we talked about this a little bit in chat. The NFL seems to be insistent on a Week 14 bye week for some godforsaken reason. And given the bracket of 16, we are kind of just stuck living with that. Single elimination bracket requires a set number of weeks, and Week 14 just happens to fall on it. So the rationale is you get the benefit of 14 or 13 weeks leading up to that. You get your player. You're supposed to get your player, barring any injury or trade or something like that. But you get 13 weeks of them to get you to this spot, and then you kind of hope that something breaks your way. And you win it. The whole season is based on your end of season rankings for payouts. So even if you lose round 1 and you were the number 1 team, you still have a good shot at getting a lot of money, if that works that way. In Week 15, we have Wisconsin versus Colorado State, 1 versus 8 matchup. 2 versus 7 is Marshall versus Clemson. The 2 lower seeds of Wake Forest and West Virginia will play Central Michigan and North Carolina. 2 upsets in this projected part of the bracket, with Clemson and Wake Forest beating out Marshall and Central Michigan. And then we get to the semifinal of Wake Forest versus Clemson, North Carolina versus Wisconsin. So 3 of the final 4 teams are all coming out of the ACC. It's just illustrative of how top heavy the ACC really is projected to be this year, with Wake Forest projecting to beat Clemson by 0.03 points, and then Wisconsin projected to beat North Carolina in a rematch of Week 1 by less than a point. And that moves us to the final championship game of Wisconsin versus Wake Forest, and Wisconsin is projected to win. So with all that said and done, here's how, with all those wins tallied up, how the end of season ranking would have happen if all this played out true. It likely won't, but this is what it would look like, with Wisconsin up at the top, North Carolina, Marshall, Wake Forest, Clemson, Central Michigan, Kentucky, Air Force, Colorado State, West Virginia, Houston, Arkansas, Mississippi State, Oregon State. We've talked about it. It's shocking. It's shocking to see a non-QB team make it that high. But if he does, that's kudos to the rest of his squad. Kent State, Georgia, Syracuse, Tulsa, NC State, Navy, Cincinnati, Northwestern, Illinois, Ball State, Michigan, rounding out the top 25 projected, with Duke and Washington State looking right there at them. So that's kind of how the season's supposed to break. This is just a fun little exercise for all of us to kind of get excited for the season and kind of see where our team really kind of measures up against everyone. I really encourage people to just have fun with this, look through it, peruse, see how you maybe stack up, ask questions, kind of build some excitement for yourself for the season. Some reminders before we go. Make sure you set a starting lineup this week. I don't really want to be tracking people down to remind them. Should be the first game of the season. You should be ready to go. Make sure you set it up with 8 starting players. You need to have a player in place for each position. As I've reminded people, you can start players on bye. You can start injured players. That's not a problem. You just need to have a body in the spots. Weeks 1 through 4, you can start any freshmen and still retain their ability to have a traditional red shirt applied. At that point, I will be opening Taxi and IR here momentarily after I close this podcast. So feel free to play your freshman the first couple weeks. A lot of these projections are factoring in rookies playing. Take it with a grain of salt. There will be plenty of rookies that do not play, even though they're projected to be a high starter for a player, because it just doesn't make sense for their eligibility purposes. So things could change just based on that factor alone. But yeah, those are the big things. Our next big activity is really going to be our Devy draft that's set for week 4. I'm going to be reaching out to teams that have retention questions around players that they want to retain for their eligibility rights. But yeah, those are the big stuff. I'm excited. We'll see how the season goes. We'll see how well everyone measures up to what they believe. Hopefully people have fun. I think this is fun to see and have this exercise done. It's fun to play in this league and have these seasons and see each week where you rank and how you stack up against other teams. That's always the fun part and why we kind of love college football's format. But yeah, with that said, I'm going to close out. Lou, obviously, thank you once again for joining me. And for anyone listening, we didn't even really bring up his team, which is just bizarre to have. Really no mention of Baylor, maybe outside of one odd mention, but we didn't reflect on his roster. He didn't even make a plea for his team to be in the top 25, so it shows real growth as a co-host for this stuff. So thank you again, Lou. I will let everyone go. Have a great evening. Ask questions. Bring them up as you need it, and we'll hopefully have a fun season together. Thanks, everyone.